Hello and welcome. In our presentation, we will examine how stigma impacts mental health and contributes to hesitancy in seeking therapy. We will approach the topic from a multicultural perspective, looking at how these barriers appear in different communities. Our discussion will define the problem, outline desired outcomes along with avenues for activism and advocacy, and review existing strategies to reduce stigma and improve access to care. To fully understand the impact of stigma, it's helpful to begin with the definition. Merriam-Webster defines stigma as a set of negative and unfair beliefs that a group or society may hold. In the context of mental health, stigma is not just an attitude. It can feel like a mark of shame that can lead to silence, suffering, and serious health consequences. According to the American Psychiatric Association, over half of people with mental illness do not receive treatment, with stigma being a major barrier. Stigma can include stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, leading many to fear being treated differently, misunderstood, or even losing their jobs. Research shows these fears often prevent people from seeking help, especially in marginalized communities where stigma intersects with race, gender, and socioeconomic barriers, further limiting access to care. The stigma can actually worsen mental health symptoms, and it operates on multiple levels. There are three main types of stigma. The first is self-stigma. Self-stigma occurs when individuals internalize negative beliefs about mental illness. They may begin to feel ashamed or unworthy because of what they are experiencing. Over time, this can result in reduced self-esteem, social withdrawal, and avoidance of treatment altogether. The second type is public stigma, which refers to the general population's negative or uninformed attitudes toward mental illness. This is often where harmful stereotypes arise, such as the belief that individuals with mental illness are dangerous, unpredictable, or to blame for their struggles. Media portrayals frequently reinforce these messages, which can isolate individuals even further. And as a result, people with invisible conditions like schizophrenia or depression may choose to hide their illness or delay treatment out of fear of judgment or discrimination. And finally, structural stigma is perhaps the most insidious. This refers to policies and institutional practices that limit access to care and resources. For example, mental health care is often underfunded or poorly covered by insurance. Workplaces may lack accommodations or offer little support for employees facing mental health challenges. These systemic issues send a powerful message that mental health is less important than physical health and reinforce the difficulty of seeking and maintaining care. Another factor influencing stigma is that in many collectivist cultures, personal challenges are often kept within the family or close circle of friends rather than shared with outsiders, and seeking mental health care can bring shame to both the individual and their family. In some Asian cultures, seeking help may conflict with values of emotional restraint and preserving family honor. In African American communities, historical and ongoing distrust of the healthcare system can create additional barriers. Gender norms also influence how stigma is experienced and addressed. When we talk about stigma, we're not just referring to individual discomfort. We're addressing a complex issue made up of personal beliefs, societal attitudes, and systemic obstacles. All of these layers must be confronted to truly improve mental health outcomes for everyone. In addressing stigma around mental health, we have identified three desired outcomes. First, we would aim to promote early help seeking by changing the public narrative and normalizing mental health treatment. Research shows that knowing someone with mental illness helps reduce stigma. Personal stories shared through media make these experiences more relatable and less intimidating, encouraging others to seek help. Second, we want to expand equitable access to therapy, regardless of a person's race, ethnicity, gender identity, language, or socioeconomic status. And third, we would work to increase cultural competency and cultural humility among mental health professionals. Cultural competency emphasizes understanding a client's background and worldview, while cultural humility involves approaching others with a respect for their beliefs and values. Now, Gigi will examine current approaches to the issue of stigma through institutional, cultural, social, and physical lenses and identify proactive steps and alternatives to achieve our outcomes.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, so yes, we're going to be discussing some current approaches across some dimensions. And the first one is institutional, So some current approaches that we have are public health initiatives. That includes things like the 988 crisis hotline and the Trevor Project, which are they're kind of like crisis lines that are set up for any type of, well, 988 is more general, so anybody can call that number, very similar to 911, and it connects you to trained counselors. And it's 24/7, whereas the Trevor Project is a crisis intervention made specifically for LGBTQ plus youth, and that includes chat as well as calling. There's also the EAPs, employee assistance programs. They are confidential counseling for employees and families of those who are employed, and it's typically short term and referral based. We also have school-based counseling services, and that is on-site counselors in K through 2 schools and also some universities. And they provide some early intervention and referrals. Next slide. So, some critiques of those approaches, as wonderful as they may sound, hotlines typically lack some community trust or some buy-in. It takes a little bit for them to get their reputation going or to spread the word, especially among BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous people of color, for fear of police involvement, or if there's any paranoia associated with what they're experiencing, they might not want to call or talk on the phone or chat if they think that, maybe someone's like monitoring them. There's also, unfortunately, a shortage of follow-up resources after crisis contact, especially depending on where you're located. With EAPs, there is a limit in how many sessions that you have, and they typically have some lower engagement due to confidentiality concerns. And when it comes to the clinicians provided with EAPs, there seems to be fewer diversity among the clinicians. And then with school counseling, it does tend to be a bit underfunded. There can be long waits, staff can be burnt out, and it's not always the most culturally responsive. Again, it just kind of depends on where it's located and the training that the counselors have. Next slide. Okay, and then we have cultural dimensions. So current approaches and some examples, we have like celebrity testimonials. So there have been public figures such as Selena Gomez, Michael Phelps, Demi Lovato. They've all shared their personal mental health journeys. And there's also just general awareness campaigns, like the month of May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so that kind of leans into national education and dialogue. And that can be posted a lot about as well. Um, there are critiques and setbacks with these as well, though. So specifically with the celebrity testimonials, although it can be really connecting to see these figures speak about their mental health in an open and candid way, they typically reflect white upper middle class values. And just kind of overlook the collectivist, religious, or traditional frameworks that are held by BIPOC and immigrant communities. It can be also a bit performative and overly individualistic, and again, just kind of centering privileged voices. And they typically, as far as the awareness campaigns in general, they fail to address deeper cultural stigmas. So let's say, like, for example, machismo culture or keeping it in the family. Therapy can be seen as a weakness. And so there's some research that I did that's found that general awareness campaigns just don't really speak to those specifics. Next slide. Okay, and then for social dimensions, there's social media movements, and so using social media platforms, and there is peer support models and school groups. So for social media movements, using a lot of hashtags has been more popular. So like hashtag therapy is cool, hashtag mental health awareness. There's also like subcultures on TikTok and Instagram with videos specifically for mental health. They're even called like mental health talk or things like that. Um, And then with peer support models and school groups, they are groups or circles for sharing coping strategies. So that can really help reduce isolation. However, there are critiques of this as well. So with social media, of course, there can be a spread of misinformation. Um, there's also a lot of people who speak with authority that actually are not licensed in any type of mental health counseling as well. So just being a bit aware and being able to be decisive about that, or decisive is not the word I want, but and the algorithms tend to favor like trendy types of mental health issues, trendy in quotes. So like using, for example, like OCD, like, oh, I'm so OCD. Like they kind of use mental health issues and diagnoses in a way that can be a little bit flip. Um, with peer groups, they may lack some professional structure, and that leads to a risk of re-traumatization or misinformation. And then both generally just fail to address like the historic mistrust in mental health systems. So again, when we're talking about the stigma that these different groups experience, their stories might not be reflected in the social media world. Next slide. And then we have the physical dimensions. So currently there's like brick and mortar clinics, things like community clinics, hospitals, private practice offices. There are also teletherapy expansions. So things like BetterHelp, Talkspace, and really any therapist that you can find that's licensed in your state and that they can see you through HIPAA compliant video platforms. So critiques of this with physical therapy spaces, it might not always feel welcoming or safe for those going, including any type of culturally relevant decor, all gender restrooms, depending on what your situation is and what you're experiencing in these different groups. If they don't see themselves represented, that could feel not great. The physical spaces are oftentimes geographically limiting. Again, it depends on where you're living. And they can be very expensive, especially for the under or uninsured populations and those living in lower socioeconomic or rural areas. Wait lists can also be months long. And then with teletherapy, it really depends on, again, if you have the privilege of having like stable internet, if you are able to navigate the digital world, if you have a private space to speak to people in. So all of these things are less available just inherently to lower income individuals. And then insurance coverage can also be very inconsistent. Next slide. Thank you. So, just some proactive steps to reduce stigma and like to reduce the stigma here. So, increasing cultural responsiveness. So this goes, the goal would be to reduce fear and misunderstanding. So hiring and training Black, Indigenous people of color as counselors or peers, having them be multilingual, having them be a part of the LGBTQ plus community, just really being able to see yourself in the person who is helping you can be really helpful there. Partnering with trusted professions, so like barbershops, churches, shelters, schools, immigrant centers, anywhere where people in these groups would go normally or naturally, being able to have some type of partnership with mental health clinicians there could be really helpful. And incorporating spirituality and family values and collectivism into therapy frameworks would be extremely helpful because that does speak to the not white population who, as you know, are not as individualistic typically. Next slide. Alrighty. And then expanding access to services. So the goal would be to eliminate structural barriers that reinforce stigma by making help seeking like easier and just more normalized in general. So being able to meet people where they are, bringing services directly into the spaces that people already go, again, like churches, libraries, things like that. Group-based approaches. Oh, I think I actually, sorry, is this? I think I might have skipped ahead and I read all of that already. the group-based approaches.
So skip ahead.
Sorry. And then the last one would be just digital equity. So expanding telehealth while promoting digital equity through loaner devices, because not everyone has access to their own tablets or phones or laptops, low-cost data plans and tech literacy support, because also a lot of the times, even if people have access to digital platforms, they might not know how to use them. Okay, now next slide, sorry. Okay. And then strengthening the public campaigns and advocating for change. So being able to strengthen the campaigns, designing campaigns by and for these specific groups. So as we were speaking about Black men, Latinx women, LGBTQ plus youths, using culturally relevant imagery and language and role models. Again, not just like elite billionaire celebrities, but maybe people who look a lot more like the people who are wanting to get help and are fighting the stigmas there. And leveraging influencers, community leaders, and lived experience advocates. So, again, people really being able to speak on how beneficial these, like the mental health therapy can be. Alrighty, next slide. Oh, and then now Jonathan will speak more about resistance that counselors may face.
Thank you, Gigi. So I'm going to be talking about resistance and, uh, everyone's favorite topic, policy and funding challenges. We all know what's going on in the news. And I hate to call it this beautiful because it's everything but beautiful, but President Trump just signed into effect the One Big Beautiful Act. And that alone is going to cut 1.02 trillion in federal spending on Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program. Uh, so that does a couple things. It cuts the federal funding, but it's also going to uh, not extend the current subsidies that make up the ACA marketplace for insurance plans affordable, which is going to lead to premiums doubling pretty much. And if you're already struggling, it's going to really do a number on you. So the Congressional Budget Office estimates that by 2034, 16 to 17 million more people are going to be uninsured, which is going to, you know, affect everything in your life, especially when it comes to getting mental health services. And then the second one's going to be stigma and personal reluctance. Uh, that's going to be an individual resistance to seek mental health services. And that could be because of personal past experiences. It could be stories that their friends have told them, the peers, employers, a lack of trust in, mental health professionals because you saw a bad TikTok and all of a sudden you're like, I don't think that's right or whatever. And so you just have a bad feeling about all, or do you have generalizations about all mental health professionals? And then also like past government experiences that just lead to distrust in, you know, helping professionals, but really they have a hidden agenda. So that's going to limit the effectiveness to normalize and expand access to care. And then I'm going to hand it over to Amy, and she's going to talk about advocacy and strategies.
Thanks, Jonathan. So, yeah, to achieve our desired outcomes in the face of the resistance that Jonathan spoke of, we can engage in advocacy through multiple approaches. So, public awareness is key. Counselors can use media to educate the public, to reduce stigma, and improve access. Studies have shown that the short videos with real stories and mental health education can increase care seeking, especially for those in need. And these efforts should include a wide range of disorders and focus on underserved groups. The information should be shared in ways that are ethical and appropriate for the audience. Policy advocacy would involve working with allies and contacting legislators to support improvements in access and quality of care. And then finally, counselor awareness and cultural competency are really essential. So as counselors, we must recognize how stigma and oppression show up in sessions and create safe spaces for all of our clients. It's also important to be informed about cultural and systemic factors that impact clients and to use culturally appropriate materials and techniques. During sessions, counselors should check for understanding And if using an interpreter, ensure that full and accurate communication is maintained throughout. So, handing it back to Jonathan now to outline counseling implications across schools and families, clinical settings, as well as diverse client groups.
Thank you, Amy. Uh, okay, so we talked about awareness. We talked about, you know, everything we need to talk about. Now we're going to talk about if we've implemented these strategies and programs and the implications it's going to involve in school counseling, family counseling, and clinical mental health counseling. So for school counseling, implementing school-wide mental health education, that's going to help reduce stigma and it's going to increase students' willingness to seek help early. Um, it's been proven early intervention programs do help when it comes to school-age children and their mental health. Uh, Another one is creating safe and judgment-free spaces like wellness rooms, peer support groups. Uh, it's basically making the students feel comfortable to seek help. That's a big barrier that needs to be addressed, and by having those spaces, hopefully it'll do that. And then addressing disparities in access this, to care, especially in high poverty communities. Um, Reducing if you if you address that, and then those disparities, ensure all students receive support regardless of background or race or anything like that. Especially when it comes to like the difference between private and public schools, that's a big one right now. Um, and then teacher engagement. Uh, Teachers play a pivotal role in identifying students' mental health concerns. And it's been proven that when teachers have positive attitude towards help seeking, it encourages that behavior and the children pick up on it. Children, kids, uh, all school age children. And targeting messaging and inclusion, that's a big one. And the important thing about that is you want to avoid framing ways that make a non-targeted groups feel excluded or that therapy is not for them, because that's really going to push them off therapy too. And then for family counseling, challenging international or intergenerational and cultural beliefs. Messages that we hear like for people like therapies for the week. That's obviously not true, but that's true in certain households. Um, and you want to just foster that openness to challenge those type of thinking, and it's reducing logistical and cultural barriers. Provide flexible options like sliding scales and telehealth that really help people. Um, Supporting families with mental health awareness, that's a big one uh, because you want to get them talking. A lot of times families will not want to talk together, and they'll say the adults are the adults and then do their own thing when really it should be like a family issue. And then culturally responsive family engagement. So you adapt approaches that respect family values and traditions. And then clinical mental health implications. You want to use affirming and inclusive practices, like correct pronouns, welcoming intake. You just really want stuff to increase client engagement and retention. Reduce structural barriers for clients experiencing hardship. Um, it's pretty much self-explanatory. You want to just do like mobile clinics, maybe transportation vouchers for people who are struggling with money, community-based care, stuff like that. And then you want to partner with trusted community leaders to combat stigma. Community-informed programs can bridge that gap in trust and engagement. And then you want to prioritize continuous training in cultural competence and humility. And that's sort of like on each individual counselor to be able to do that. Because you don't want to risk client harm or any cultural misunderstanding. And next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to talk about the demographics for four specific implications. The first one's going to be African American men. Um, when it comes to early seeking help, um, you want to like reframe help seeking as a sign of strength to counter like that stigma of masculinity and cultural expectations. Because mental health is often tied to masculinity, like when someone's feeling any type of emotions, oh, well, that's weak, you shouldn't cry and stuff like that. And then you want to you want to like reframe it as a sign of strength that's focused on like leadership and family responsibility. And then equitable access, officer services in trusted community spaces like churches and cultural centers. That helps reduce stigma and build trust because you're already within the community that they trust, so they can feel more welcome. And then cultural competency, um, that's for each counselor to train on historical trauma and systematic racism and addressing implicit biases that they may have. Understanding cultural norms that influence attitude towards mental health. And then I'm going to be talking about Latinx women. So for early help seeking, you want to normalize therapy through outreach in schools, churches, and family health clinics. Um, you want to frame it in a way that it's a tool to support overall family well-being. Um, and then equitable access, offer bilingual services with flexible scheduling, incorporating family when appropriate. That could help reduce resistance and improve engagement because people have families, people have jobs. It's hard to get access when you're trying to juggle two things at once. And then cultural competency, train in culturally responsive care with understanding of values like spirituality and family connections. And that's important because what's important to them, you have to take that into consideration, or else you're gonna turn them off therapy. Next, I'm going to be talking about LGBTQ plus youth. For early health seeking, you want to create affirming and visible support in schools and communities, like GSAs and LGBTQ plus centers. These individuals often face high rates of stigma and discrimination, mental health, and they sometimes come from, not all the times, unsupportive environments. So it's safe. It's important that they have those safe spaces. Equitable access, ensure all services are inclusive, accessible, and gender affirming. Um, and then cultural competency, train in LT or LGBTQ plus issues, intersectionality, and cultural humility. And you want to create safe spaces for identity exploration and healing. That's really essential to building that trust between the counselor and client, and then that does affect the therapeutic process. Okay. And then lastly, I'm going to be talking about low socioeconomic status and homeless individuals. So early help seeking offer low barrier services in familiar places like shelters and food pantries. You want to have them where they're already going to those programs. So having those mental health services there is a plus, and like normalize the therapy there. Equitable access, provide free services if you can. That's not always the case, but voluntary services are also included. Mobile counseling and integrated care models. Um, that's huge. And then and then cultural competency, train in trauma-informed care and poverty-informed care with focus on empowerment. Um, yeah. And next slide. Okay, so breaking the stigma, like moving forward together. How do we move forward together? So as mental health advocates, future counselors, we could do all these things. Promote early help seeking by normalizing therapy and mental health care, advocate for equitable access to cultural response services, and then develop cultural competency and humility in our practice. And by addressing those through a multicultural lens, we can be more inclusive, have a supporting environment where seeking help is normalized and access to care. Like the truth is, bad things are going to happen. Truth is, people are going to fail you. You're going to get hurt. But by moving forward together, we could help each other out and we could all improve together. Thank you.